Good afternoon, everyone. In Zimbabwe, good morning to those in the United States. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Getting Improved Seed to Smallholder Farmers in Zimbabwe, Emerging Issues and Lessons from Other African Countries, hosted by the Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association, Zimbabwe Seed Association, the Africa Seed Access Index, and Cornell University Global Development. My name is Sean. I'm based in the United States in Chicago, and I'm a member of the TASAI team, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you today. Before we start, I'd like to note just a few Zoom housekeeping points, since we are in the virtual world right now. To reduce background noise, everyone has been muted upon entry to the webinar, with the exception of our panelists who will be speaking today. We ask that you use the chat box for any questions directed toward the panelists or toward the host. And if you prefer to ask a question directly, just raise your hand and we will unmute you. The raise hand feature is found at the bottom right-hand screen, next to the at the bottom right-hand of your screen. Lastly, today's session is being recorded. For those who are curious, we will use them for internal purposes only. And again, thank you so much for joining us. And I would now like to turn over the official welcome to Dr. Zikali, Vice President of the Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association. Dr. Zikali, the microphone and floor are yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. And thank you, Sean, for referring to me as Vice President, because that's the only position that I can be associated with President, so I'm very proud of it. So on behalf of my President and the entire executive of Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association, I'm very thankful and grateful that you accepted this invitation to share your wisdom that you have gathered over a fifth of a century years of working in the field. And we are really proud of you as the Zimbabweans, but at the same time, we are very proud because today you have got an audience that is not only including Zimbabwe and the USA. There are some professors who are based in Nigeria. There are some who are in South Africa. There are some who are in Kenya, Zambia.
Correct. That's correct. That's correct. You can't see who else is on. Yeah.
Can you hear me? I hope I'm being clear.
Yes.
All right. So I just wanted, for the benefit of others who might not have done a little bit of background check, in a very few minutes, I've thanked the organizers of Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association, not mentioning people by names, but I would mention the secretary and also the president. We have worked very hard behind the scenes to make this possible. I just want to give a brief summary of what Professor Mabaya has done. As I have said, he has been in the field for more than 20 years now. He has presented on topics like hunger busters, getting improved seed to smallholder farmers, which he's going to do today. He has also talked about the power of improved seed. He has talked about climate change and smart seeds, among others that he has been hammering on. And today we're privileged that he'll be talking to us directly on getting improved seed to smallholder farmers in Zimbabwe. Emerging issues and lessons from other African countries. We can't wait for you to share with us your wisdom. And for the benefit of others as well, Dr. Kuchwayo came from UZ, where he did an BSc in Economics and Extension in 1994. Then in 1998, he went to Cornell University, where he was given, or where he attained a master's in resource and management economics, graduated in 1998. And then to add a further onto his ever-expanding head, he went to Cornell University again, and this time got a PhD in applied economics and management. And he is interested in applied economics, food and agriculture economics, international and development economics. And I'm sure Zimbabwe needs somebody like you, Professor. Right, and today we are going to give you enough time to share with us your wisdom. And I would like to congratulate everyone who has survived the pandemic so far. Let's continue staying safe, because if we lose soldiers along the way, we won't have enough people to fight this pandemic. It might not be on a lot of people's programs, but we're privileged today to have Dr. Kuchwayo, who is going to speak on behalf of the President of Zimbabwe, on behalf of the Cabinet of Zimbabwe, on behalf of the Minister of Agriculture, on behalf of the Permanent Secretary, and on behalf of himself. So I'm going to hand over to him so that he shares with us what the government thinks about this event. And then when he has finished, I'll hand it over to Professor Mabaya to get going. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Over to you, Dr. Kuchwayo.
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues.
Good afternoon.
I'm happy to be participating in this event, which is important for us because it informs policy in terms of seed availability to smallholder farmers in Zimbabwe. I know that Dr. Zikali has given me a lot of responsibility to represent a lot of people. So it's a mammoth task. But briefly, I would like to say that we welcome the role that the Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association is doing to put us together and keep us focused in terms of looking at critical topics that will result in food security and nutrition. As you know, the policy of the government, Vision 2030, is to ensure that the Zimbabwe becomes a food secure nation by the year 2030, and also we become a middle income economy. So in terms of seed availability, we welcome that there's been an improvement in availability to smallholder farmers, but a lot still needs to be done in terms of the traditional grain. We find that most of the time when seed is required for government programs, we do not find them because maybe the seed sector is not ready to supply. So there are poor offtake arrangements which could be improved on in order to ensure that we get the available seed for smallholder grains and also for exotic vegetable seed. We import most of our seed, about 80% are imports, and would require these value chains to be developed so as to increase local capacity to supply seed for the smallholder farmers. And also this applies to indigenous vegetables such as the amaranthus, the spiderweb. We require to develop these value chains so that we can respond to government policies in terms of availing these indigenous vegetables to our farmers. And then coming to the National Crop Improvement Program, we find that we have challenges in terms of early generation seed development. So this is an area that we think we can have synergies with the private sector to try and see how to ensure that the newly released varieties are available to farmers right after the release of those varieties. And then the other issue that we should take note of is that what is our variety replacement policy? We find that the seed industry is churning out a lot of varieties, but farmers tend to identify with what they already know. So how do we implement a replacement policy and at the same time not disadvantaging farmers who are familiar with already released varieties? So I think we need to think along those lines so that we have these early promotional activities to ensure that the seed ultimately reaches the smallholder farmers. So with those few remarks, I would like to wish the audience and Professor Mabaya in particular a very good presentation, and all of us, we hope we're going to learn from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kuchwayo, for elaborating very clearly the government position. And I just want to tell you, Professor Mabaya, that we have got just under 80 people who have logged on. I'm sure before you get into 5 minutes. Most of those guys who have registered will be online. But you have got a very good audience already. Over to you now, Professor.
Thank you very much to both Dr. Zikali and Dr. Kuchwayo. I'm quite honored to have this privilege to talk to what I would consider my colleagues and peers working in this particular area. I've done some work in seed sector development across Africa for maybe the last 20 years. This is an area that I'm both passionate about in person, but also professionally. I've committed part of my life to this. But it's always an honor when you're invited back in your home country to make a presentation like this where we can share some knowledge and information. I am looking forward to maybe a discussion after this. Obviously, there's only so much I can say in half an hour to summarize things that I've learned over 20 years. But I'm hoping this is just a way of getting the conversation started on this very, very important topic. So let's just start off with a quick disclaimer. Even though I speak a lot about seed issues across Africa, I am not a plant breeder. I am actually an agricultural economist. Almost everything that I learned about plant breeding and crop genetics, I learned from Professor Tongona, who is one of the panelists. When he was my lecturer at University of Zimbabwe, I took that one course in crop science, and that has anchored me in topics around this, including other things that I've learned along the way. So I'm going to be sharing with you here some key emerging lessons that we're learning from other African countries and contextualizing them within Zimbabwe as well. So let's get started. The outline of my presentation is going to be as follows. I'll start off by giving you a brief background and context in Zimbabwe. I know I'm preaching to the choir, so I will not repeat things that you already know. Then I'll introduce this African Seed Access Index. I'll talk a little bit about seed structure and role of seed companies, both in Zimbabwe and across Africa. Then we'll talk to release of new varieties across Africa, and a topic that's quite important, especially to the Plant Breeders Association. Then I'll talk about the growing challenge of fake or counterfeit seed. I'll use those terms interchangeably. And I'll share key lessons from across Africa. And then maybe if we have time, I'll revisit a little bit of discussion on the GMO debate. I left this for last because I don't want that to take up all the oxygen in the room. And I'll end up with some few concluding remarks. Most of all, I'm looking forward to a robust discussion in Q&A. But even beyond this, I hope that this is a conversation that we can continue. So let's start where it all starts, at least for me. SR52. Southern Rhodesia 52. This is the name of a hybrid maize variety. It is the first single cross maize hybrid to be commercialized in the world, not just in Zimbabwe or in Southern Africa or Africa, in the world. And it really represents Zimbabwe's contribution to global knowledge of food security. So if you consider how many people eat maize or rely on maize for livelihoods, and you look at what this one variety has contributed, it's actually staggering. Over the weekend, when I was preparing for these remarks, I read a very good thesis. I encourage all of you to take a look at it, called Why SR52 is Such a Great Maize Hybrid. That's by Tatenda Musimwa, supervised by my classmate, John Derera. This is what you see here for those who don't have breeding background. In the middle there is that variety called SR52. That's a ruler they're showing you is about 30 centimeters long. I remember it even being longer, maybe it's because I was a small boy then. This variety here put a lot of us through school, including myself. I owe some of my, life achievements to varieties like this. On the left side is the CSC, that's the two parents and N3. So the two parents are on the side and the varieties in the middle. It shows you what they call hybrid, vigor. And this is the beginning of hybrid, commercialization around the world. So we, from the beginning, Zimbabwe started off on a very solid foundation of advances in plant breeding. Now, I would like to look at Zimbabwe's, I'm sorry for the focus on maize, but I want to start off by giving us a sense of how Zimbabwe has been doing in terms of productivity, in terms of yield. This graph here shows you maize use in Zimbabwe from 1960 to 2019, the last the last 60 years. What you see there at the beginning, I'll use my mouse here to show you, is you see the power of those hybrids that came in the 60s and 70s that took Zimbabwe, very high, including SR52, R201, very powerful. And I would say this is the first phase where we had a very significant boost in our yields in terms of metric tons per hectare. We got to about 2 on average. Then came the next phase where I think we held bay from the 1970s all the way to the 90s. We were pretty much constant. You see that there's rapid fluctuation which came from droughts and weather disasters across the country. But if it helps, the solid line shows you the 3-year moving average. So it smoothens out the yearly fluctuations from droughts. Then there was some decline from, I'll say, early 90s to all the way down to around 2015. This part here, you see significant decline and a lot of things that were taking place around that time, and also extreme weather conditions. But I'm excited to see that, this last tail part here shows a Zimbabwe that's potentially is bouncing back. And given the muscle memory where our farmers already know what to do, I'm always very hopeful that Zimbabwe can bounce back rapidly from to achieve higher yields in crop. So you may be wondering, that's the yield levels for Zimbabwe. How do we compare with other regional countries in Africa? So I've pretty much taken that same curve that we had for Zimbabwe, the graphic for Zimbabwe, and we've tried to compare Zimbabwe with other countries, namely Ghana, Kenya, Ghana in yellow, Kenya in red, Zambia in purple, and South Africa in black. You can see the obvious thing that before the 1970s, Zimbabwe actually with those hybrids was actually not just on top of Africa in terms of the world productivity. We were leading the curve. We held our own in the middle and we started to decline. Meanwhile, Kenya has had a very steadier, almost flat curve here with a good sharp increase at the end. But look at, for example, Ghana. Was at 1 ton per hectare for a long time, but has enjoyed very, very steady, robust growth up to where they are now. Same thing with Zambia. It went up and down due to regional climatic conditions. You can see it matches Zimbabwe, and has really done a good job going up in the last part. South Africa, almost similar to the other ones, but you see a big jump from the early 2000s, around the time when GM crop commercialization was introduced to where it is now. Now there's a lot of theories around this, there's a lot of other factors into play, but it's quite interesting to note that point where they are now in terms of national average yields. Zimbabwe, unfortunately, has been confounded by erratic rainfall and droughts. So part of these yield levels that you see are not just a result of, kind of varieties and, some of this is largely explained by the drought conditions there. This is a map that I got from the recent government report that shows you the maize yields across the country in Zimbabwe. The red part, which is dominant, is less than 0.3 tons per hectare. And this was in a drought year, 2018-2019 season. You see the green parts, dark green parts where it's just above 1.21 tons per hectare. It's very, very small and almost trivial. So it shows you, first of all, the power that these extreme weather conditions have had in terms of reversing the gains that we've had, and why we really need to focus on getting varieties that can tolerate and withstand extreme weather conditions, especially drought. I'll also add here that you see even the Eastern Highlands, the part that is supposed to be very robust in rainfall, was also affected by those. I'm excited to hear that this year the news is a little bit different and we're expecting a bumper harvest. When we have good rains, we've always been able to get a good and robust harvest as well. Now, let me switch over to what I have been working in the space of the African Seed Access Index. about 10 years ago, I led an initiative to look at evaluating seed systems across African countries. And that led to the birth of this initiative called the African Seed Access Index. In short, we call it TASAI. So TASAI seeks to promote the creation and maintenance of enabling environments for competitive seed systems that serve smallholder farmers in Africa. You know, we're very deliberate about wanting to serve smallholder farmers because you can have seed systems that serve only commercial farmers. It is this enabling environment that we seek to measure, track, and compare across both time and space. So we take this measurement tool and we use it to compare different African countries, and we also measure them across time. I'm excited to say that TASAI has grown over the years, but I'll give you just a flavor of what it is that we look at before I start sharing some of our results. So basically what TASAI is, you can think of it as a 22-point indicator or 22-point inspection of a seed sector in a country. We look at research and development, the adequacy of active breeders, the number of varieties released, the number of varieties with special features, availability of basic seed. We also look at industry competitiveness, including number of active seed companies, quality of seed that is produced, quantities produced, number of varieties sold, average age of varieties. As Dr. Twayo was saying, we don't want our farmers to have old varieties, market concentration, market share of state-owned companies. Then when you get to policy, we look at the length of variety release process, the state of implementation of national seed policy frameworks, harmonization with regional regulations, efforts to eradicate fake seed, which I'll get into in a while, and the use of government subsidies to promote the industry. We also look at institutional support, such as the performance of the National Seed Trade Association and the adequacy of seed inspection services. And lastly, and most importantly, we look at the service to smallholder farmers, including availability of agricultural extension services, agro-dealer concentration, availability of seed in small packages, and seed to grain price ratio. We look at these per crop, and we also look at what the impact they have on the overall growth of the seed sector in the country. Our very basic theory of change is that if we take all these things together, research and development, good regulations and policies, competitive industry, institutional support, and service to smallholder farmers, if you do all this right, it should lead to competitive systems that are serving smallholder farmers, providing good quality seed that is affordable, accessible, and of high quality. That's what I think everybody in the room today is all seeking to achieve. TASAI has grown from year to year. It started off with just 4 pilot countries back in 2014, where we started off including in Zimbabwe, that is there at the bottom. We've now covered 22 different African countries, and you can see the different rounds of studies that we've done. And this map shows you just a breadth of coverage of what we've been able to do with this tool. So the results that I'm sharing with you today are all from studies that we've conducted in these many countries, and we're expanding the footprint of TASAI, this year and next year as well. So here's the basic structure of a formal seed sector across many African countries. This could be almost anywhere. We have research and development that's being conducted through the National Agricultural Research Institutions and the CG systems such as CMET, IATA, and you also have private companies that are doing some research and development. When it comes to production and processing, in a country like Zimbabwe, this is almost all in the hands of private seed companies. In some countries around Africa, government is still very much involved there. When it comes to marketing and distribution, you have rural agro dealers, NGOs that are distributing seed to smallholder farmers. And under farmer utilization, you have commercial farmers, smallholder farmers, and some institutions. The point that I want to emphasize here is that the role of the private seed sector is critical, especially at almost every stage of the value chain, but especially under production and processing. The complexity in many African countries that you have so many different players, and these players have different conflicting sometimes interests. You have NGOs that are interested maybe in philanthropy. You have government that is interested in welfare of people, but also in votes. You have private companies that are interested in profits. These things do not always align well, and sometimes they can be actually in conflict. So you require a very coordinated industry to make sure that the interest of the entire ecosystem of players is well aligned. On the other left side, you see the role of government in creating right policy and regulations, different donor initiatives, advocacy, and interest groups that are shaping how this industry develops. By contrast, in developed countries like I'm sitting right now in the US, you have the research and development, production, processing, marketing, and distribution is done by one company. I just gave in this case an example of Bayer. All this system is under one umbrella until the point where the seed gets to the farmer. So these coordination challenges that we face are less of an issue there. The point that I'm trying to make that in Zimbabwe and many other African countries, to get a viable competitive seed sector, you need all these different players sitting under one roof and coordinating their activities very carefully. Now let's look for a second at what Zimbabwe has been able to do in terms of new varieties being availed on the market. I'll start with Zimbabwe, then I'll go to other African countries. This graph here shows you 3-year moving average of number of varieties released in Zimbabwe from 2000 to 2020 for the last 20 years. You can see the top line is number of maize varieties. Very, very impressive. Some ups and downs, but on average, about 8 new varieties that are being registered in Zimbabwe per year. When you look at the other crops, we look at 4 crops per country in TASAI. The second, third, and fourth most important crops: sorghum, soybean, and beans. The numbers there are not impressive at all. We are all less than an average of 1 variety per year. In fact, over the last 20 years, there's only been 14 new sorghum varieties released, 21 soybean varieties, and 19 bean varieties. Well, while maize is very, very important to Zimbabwe as a staple crop, we definitely need more investment in the development of new varieties for these other crops, especially as we recognize now that these are critical for both drought resistance, especially the small grains like sorghum, but also for nutrition. You cannot just have salsa alone. You need some, protein diet in your diet for you to be healthy. So you can see over the last 20 years, the good news is Zimbabwe has had a very robust breeding effort, especially in maize, and we continue to have many varieties on the market, but we have not done enough on the other crops that are also important to the country. Now let's compare with what other African countries have done. This is our neighbor Zambia. Basically the same story. Like Zimbabwe, they love their, I think they call it Nsima there. Maize is still leading as a crop, averaging about 10 to 12 varieties per year. But the other crops are almost neglected as well, with the exception of some bean varieties that did well in the early 2009. Switching gears to Malawi, look at Malawi, almost same story as well. You see there's quite a, it's not as smooth as Zimbabwe. They're breeding efforts in maize, which is the top one, but they've had some significant activity around bean, Chita is the research station. Then after that, the groundnut and soybean, that line is almost flat at 0. Go further north to Kenya, you get it. Same story. Like Zimbabweans, they love their maize. They call it ugali there. Maize has been doing very well, averaging maybe more than 20 varieties per year. And I'll get to national averages later on. But the other crops are not doing as well, especially the cowpea and sorghum has had just in the last couple of years, more varieties being released. I'm starting to sound like I'm echoing myself, but it's important that you see that this is not a uniquely Zimbabwean problem. So here is Nigeria. You see again maize, fufu, they love, very big numbers there. But unlike the other countries, there's a little bit more diversity here. They have breeding efforts in sorghum and also in rice that are doing very well. And I guess their diet there is a little bit more diversified than what we will have in Zimbabwe or Southern Africa. So let's see how Zimbabwe stacks up just for maize against other countries. This graph here shows you the number of maize varieties released in the last 3 years from the per country. There is South Africa with 236 new maize varieties when we last did a study in South Africa. Number 2 was Kenya at 98, averaging about more than 30 varieties per year. Then you have Tanzania at 44, Zambia at 37, then Zimbabwe comes strongly at 27. Then you have the other countries, Uganda, Nigeria, Malawi, Ghana, it gets lower and lower. The good news here is that if you account for population size, I would say Zimbabwe is holding its weight in terms of number of varieties per capita. Probably we're only second to South Africa. We're doing very well for a country that is relatively small compared to Kenya, South Africa, and Zambia. So that's actually quite very, very good news. And we should continue to do well in that space. The key point that I want to make around the number of varieties released is that, first of all, we need to intensify and reorient our breeding efforts. Highest yield is no longer the top priority for breeding efforts. We need to move, I think most of the national, national performance trials and DUS were very much anchored around how much can you get per hectare for every variety. We need to reorient our breeding efforts so that they cater more for climate smart features. And under climate smart features, I'm not just talking about drought, we're talking about extreme weather conditions that are likely to become much more common as we battle with climate change. So they include, in addition to drought tolerance, we need flood resistance. This year, for example, Zimbabwe was hit with a lot of flood, frost resistance, and also other, biotic stresses that can come from this climate change. It's introducing new diseases, new pests that can also affect our crops. So we need to move our breeding efforts to protect the yield that we have already, more than just to try and increase yield. We also need to reduce our dependency on maize, by putting investment efforts into other crops as well. And we need to shift. I'm glad that Dr. Kukiwayo mentioned that in addition to food security, nutritional security is becoming important. For a long time, many African countries have focused almost exclusively on food security. The new word now is that you should not be able to mention the word food security without mentioning food and nutritional security. You can go back to almost every document and find and replace food security and put food and nutritional security. This map here, for those of you who are hardcore believers in you need to have eaten maize, everything else is secondary. I want to show you a graph that I saw last year. I was visiting the Ministry of Agriculture office in Masvingo when I was still at the African Development Bank. They had this map here on the wall, which shows you the prevalence of stunting by district in Zimbabwe. Now, this may not strike many people as interesting in these different colors there, but me being from Zimbabwe, it struck me that our bread basket for Zimbabwe, natural region 1, Eastern Highlands, this area here, we rely on that part to feed much of the country because they are solid, good rains, a lot of maize there. But if you look at this nutritional map, the highest prevalence of childhood stunting is in that particular region. The lower areas that are actually in green are some of the areas that we think is very drought prone, this very poor maize yield there, but it has forced those people to diversify their diets. There's much more protein, there's other grains, and therefore nutritional status is much better there than it is in other parts of the country where maize might be doing very well. So this again really drives home the point that we need to move beyond just looking at maize as a staple crop. we need to diversify our diets by introducing beans, sorghum, millet, and all the other crops that constitute a nutritious diet. Now I'm going to move over to another area that I think, if you ask me, one of the single biggest threat to the seed sector viability in Africa is something that we call fake seed or counterfeit seed. This is basically a seed that is sold to farmers, but does not turn out to be what is advertised as. Somebody has gone out there, put grain in a packet and sold it out to farmers. This graphic shows you across these different countries the number of cases reported of fake seed. Per year, that's the number that's in yellow. You can see in DRC Congo, for example, about 190 unique cases of fake seed. These are big transactions I'm talking about. Most of them are very big transactions. You see the other countries not so big. I think the last time we done this in Zimbabwe, this was at around 20. Nigeria, around 20 as well. The other number that you see in green is we asked the seed industry, what is your satisfaction with government efforts to respond to this crisis of fake seed? You see different measures. Zimbabwe was rated at about slightly over half, about 55% industry satisfaction. Almost all the countries, the industry is not happy about the government response to this particular problem. Now, it may sound like a trivial case, but this is one of those problems that if it's not addressed when it's still small, it has a way of growing and growing and growing. How do we address this challenge of fake seed? I want to share some examples, but before I do that, I want to say the main driver of fake seed is that there's a very big difference in the price of grain versus the price of seed. Often that is about 5-fold difference, 3 to 5 times the price of grain for maize versus the price of a seed maize. So some, maybe entrepreneurial and unscrupulous middlemen can just take grain, put some dye on it, and sell it out on the market. This requires a coordination of the entire industry. It's very hard for one single company to deal with this problem by themselves. So I want to share with you a very successful case of a country that has been able to deal with this particular problem, and that is Kenya. Kenya tried many different solutions, that way, you seal the bags, you put a label inside, you try to have good policy and regulatory reform. Clever people always find ways around that. What they've introduced now that has since worked very well from 2017 is that they introduced electronic authentication system that is STAC, that's Seed Trade Association of Kenya, in collaboration with MP Decree Gold Keys. They developed this nifty tool here that you see on that package of seed. Basically what it is, it works like a scratch card that we use to recharge our cell phones when you're paying as you go. Every seed package that's above 2 kgs has one of those little stickers on top of it. When a farmer buys it, that number there is covered, and they get the seed, they scratch the card, they send a text message to 1393, and they enter the code, and then it gives them back information on if this seed is authentic or not. Now, there's no way for middle people to break into that code. It's a very secure code, and it's actually working very well for Kenya. The cost is relatively low, and the adoption has been actually very high. But the trick here is that the entire industry in Kenya, through STAC, decided that they were going to do this, brought government on board, brought private sector on board, and rolled out this very innovative solution. It's also being used for other products, such as pharmaceuticals and other products that are being counterfeited. How is it performing? The seed industry in Kenya in 2013 rated satisfaction with government efforts at 39%. These are TASAI numbers. And it went up to 72% by 2017 when they introduced this new measure. Most seed companies, I think all now, are fully compliant. There's a rapid increase in the number that were sold, from 10 million in 2016, 20 million in 2017, 30 million in 2018, 30 million in 2019. You can see how much this is actually making a difference. And most of these happen to be for maize, about 75% of the levels. Repeating the numbers again for Kenya, you can see the number of cases of fake seed have gone down as a result of this intervention. The rating of government is gone from very poor, from poor, fair to good over this entire period as well. Here's an area that if we wanted to, Zimbabwe decided to do this, we have the connections, we bring in these partners that have done it so well in other countries. We can learn from them. We can bring the association, the partners to a country like Zimbabwe to see if they want to try out a method like that. So there's another way of dealing with fake seed, and that's through the rule of law, right? We can always arrest the people that are proliferating fake seed. The Zimbabwe Republican Police can do that. What's the problem with that? Well, here's an extraction that I copied from the Seed Act of Zimbabwe, section 24. I'm just reading you the important parts. Yes, we have a law that forbids the sale of counterfeit seeds. It says any person who sells any seed upon the container of which a false or misleading statement in connection to the contents thereof is printed, or sells supplies of any seed which does not possess the properties attributed to it, shall be guilty of an offense and liable, blah, 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 to a fine not exceeding $100. Now, at some point, this was a big amount, right? $100. But I think by today's conversion, this is maybe slightly over $1, maybe up to $10. The point that I'm trying to make is that we have laws and regulations that were meant to be deterrent. They are not updated. As a result, if you're caught selling counterfeit seed, it's fairly easy for you to be back on the street the next day after you've just paid your fine. We need to revise our laws and regulations to make sure that they're in touch with what is happening in the entire industry as well. So we cannot afford to deal with this through the law. It requires coordination of the entire seed sector, the industry itself, Zimbabwe Republican Police, Seed Services Unit. All these players have to play their part to make sure that we deal with this problem. If we let this problem get out of hand, we might not be able to take it back. It's one of those things that once you let it out, can be very hard to control. Lastly, you remember I wanted to touch a little bit about the GMO debate. Let me just make a few fine points because we're running to the end of our time. First of all, my thoughts of why Zimbabwe should reconsider genetically modified crops. The first one is that there's overwhelming evidence of its safety. This consensus is that there's no substantiated evidence that GMO foods are less safe than non-GMO foods, derived food products. The first GMO crop was put on the market, I think it was 1983. Here we are 40 years later. Yes, you can wait for more evidence to come, but the science is very clear on this. There's not been any demonstrated. We need to be qualified and say, for the current products that are on the market, we do not see any reason for concern. There are also new challenges that are emerging due to climate change, abiotic and biotic stresses that require very rapid breeding efforts. We also need to stay competitive against food imports. About 10 years ago, I put an article that was published in Sunday Mail, the Herald, that most of the food that we bring as processed food from South Africa turns out to be genetically modified. This might sound controversial, but it's a simple fact. So by stopping our farmers from benefiting from this technology, we are still allowing the same food to be consumed without necessarily while putting our farmers at a competitive disadvantage. There's also potential to add nutritional values through biofortification. But last and most importantly, remember I started off this presentation with Zimbabwe's introduction of SR 52. The next generation of research always build from the previous ones. So the new frontier now is no longer GMO. It's actually, gene editing, and it builds very much on that same platform. If we ignore this previous generation, we might lose out on the next generation of gene editing technology that's coming on the market now. I will not get into details of what gene editing is, but it's basically a much more refined tool that can remove certain genes from a sequence without necessarily introducing genes from a foreign organism. So a basic example is You know, when you drop a potato, it goes very brown, or an apple. That's because of an enzyme. Scientists can now just go and cut off that enzyme from the crop. So without introducing new material, you can stop a crop from doing that, and it gives many benefits to the consumer and the farmer. To close, here are some of the 10 lessons that we've learned in doing TASAI work across all these different African countries. One, maize is still dominating the breeding programs. I made that point very well. Old varieties persist, as made by Dr. Kutuayo. We want our farmers to adopt new varieties that are better performing. There's a growth in private sector in most countries led by small companies. The industry is consolidating as the seed sector matures. We are seeing a diminished role of government in seed production, which we think is very positive. There are notable improvements in seed import across the regions as we try to harmonize regional harmonization. Good policy instruments, very weak implementation in most African countries with superb documents, but they're not being implemented well. We're seeing a rapid privatization of seed inspection services. The persistent challenge of fake seed continues to grow. And I want to emphasize the vital role of the country seed trade association in representing the industry's interest. My conclusion is that Zimbabwe has a very solid foundation in terms of a seed sector. It's been resilient and it's relatively advanced compared to most African countries. Improved seed is necessary, but not sufficient to close the yield gap. You still need fertilizer, you need markets, you need extension. So let's not kid ourselves. We still need all these other enabling policies as well and measures. Other countries are catching up very fast with the first move advantage, but other countries are catching up. Investment in breeding should go beyond high yield to cater for climate smart, high nutrition, disease resistance, and gender responsiveness. And the last one is a challenge for the Zimbabwe Seed Trade Association to work more closely with the government in driving the necessary policy and regulatory reform that will make sure that our industry remains competitive. Thank you very much for your time. Hello.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your sharing your wisdom, and it's much appreciated. And a lot of eye-opening things that you shared with us there. According to the program, now we should be having a moderated discussion led by Dr. McRobert. I don't know whether we go straight into that. Is it where the questions are going to come from? Over to you, Chair, Dr. McRobert.
And I'll stop sharing my screen so I can also see the people who are.
I'm not sure, is Dr. McRobert with us? I don't see him here. But I will just say that we have put out a message in the chat to give people instructions on how they can ask their questions. So if you want us to field questions, we can, Sean and I are on standby to do that. So I'm just putting that out there. Thank you.
So maybe Sean, you could guide us through the Q&A. You can maybe target questions that are already in the chat, or also ask people to ask questions if they want to.
Thanks so much, Dr. Mabaya. Yes, we've put a message in the chat that if you do have a question and you'd like to ask your question rather than putting it in the chat, simply raise your hand. You'll see that feature at the bottom right-hand part of your screen, and we will unmute you, and then you can ask your question. But I do ask, or we do ask, that you note your association if you'd like to do that, and note the subject of your question. We also ask that you keep the question as short as possible so that we can allow more time for answers, for the answer, and more time for questions. So I will just start with the first question that I see here. which is directed to you, Ed. I'm sorry, I cannot see the full name. So if you'd like to just raise your hand so we know the name of the person who's asking the question. And it says, Dr. Professor Mabaya, your presentation clearly shows the importance of using science, research, and development to increase, oh, I'm sorry, just lost, we have several coming in, so it's
You see, okay, Sean, I can
sort of updating as it comes in, so I just
updating.
lost that.
Sean, I can see it. Do you want me
Okay,
to
yeah, if you can take that, Krista,
yeah,
that would be
okay.
great.
So actually there's two questions. I see the first one I saw was from, it says EDT Capon. Hopefully I'm reading that correctly. It says, thank you, Professor, for a very informative presentation, the overall work you have and are still doing. Unfortunately, no, Professor, you're missing the point about the GMO debate, because it is only an assumption that because we have been eating GMO food for so many years, therefore GMO is safe. And there are two questions here. One, is it necessary to speculate and misinform the public, as it were, on the basis of such assumptions that are not premised on sound science, or at least where we do not have sufficient information? And the question, what about the potential of gene flow from GMOs? I don't know if you want to take question.
So I will be very brief on this one, because like I said, this always has the potential to take out all the oxygen in the room. We could spend all day debating GMOs, because obviously this is an area that people are very passionate about. First of all, you can take away GMO from this entire discussion and conversation. There's so much that you can do with hybrids and open pollinated varieties. The point of my talk is getting improved seed to farmers. The second point is that the science is very much on the side of GMO. I will challenge whoever is making this question to send me any single peer-reviewed journal article that shows either otherwise. We've had more than, I would say more than 30 years of this science, a lot of well-funded research products that have proven the safety of this. And indeed, things are changing as we speak, but I don't expect that I'll convince anybody with just my statement in this spot. So let's just shelve that GMO debate for now. I don't want this to be to take away the focus of the talk and the conversation.
Okay. That hopefully, then I guess we can also say anybody who wishes to reach out to Professor Mabaya is certainly welcome to do so. Sean, do you have a question? Any hands are up? Maybe we can just take turns switching between that and reading chat comments, so we don't leave anybody who has a hand up.
I saw two questions that I could respond to from the chat. One of it was that the yields that I'm showing for open pollinated varieties or for hybrids. That is a good question. These are national averages. And I would also say that they have a way of masking the detail per crop and within the region. So those are national averages that include both open pollinated varieties and hybrids.
Ed, did you have a second answer? You said there were two questions.
Let me see, there was
a question on distribution, the distribution of seeds. It says it seemed to miss the distribution of seeds. In Zimbabwe, distribution network in the rural areas is poor due to low volumes of economic activity, with the main mode being donor and government distributions. Many farmers therefore plant retained seeds. I guess this is a comment, not so much a question.
And it's an excellent comment. I think we should not underestimate the power of getting the seed to the farmer itself. It requires a very well-coordinated agro-dealer network. Fortunately, in Zimbabwe, our farmers, because they've used improved seed before, always reach out to, before planting season. Seed is usually relatively available. Either people send orders to town, but there is a need there to integrate very closely with the agro-dealer network to make sure that seed is available closest as possible to the farmer at the time of planting.
Great. So I guess I'll just continue, because I also see a question from Dr. Cosmos, but then he had a hand raised up, so maybe that's the question.
I
so
think
let me get
Dr. Cosmos is unmuted, so you could ask it.
Okay, great. Maybe then you can ask your question.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Ed, for that great presentation. I just wanted to ask one question. TASAI idea is great. The results that come up from there are very clear and very nice. But how have these outcomes been received by governments? And can you tell us what action some of the governments have done to successfully use these results and improve the seed delivery system in any country? Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. I think we have had very impressive reception by government, but I think the pathway to impact is it's not that clear from our work to government immediately always. We do share our results with government whenever we do come up with a report, but we also rely on industry and all the other seed industry stakeholders to go and present this information to the government. For example, we're just finishing a seed sector study now in Ghana. We're convening a meeting where government, private sector, donor agencies that are working in this space, they're all involved in, they come and listen to these reports. What's been exciting actually, for at least for me, is that this almost works like, African countries don't like to be compared to non-African countries. We can always say, yes, they're doing that in the developed world, but the moment you see Malawi is doing better than us, it's almost like the Africa Cup of Nations. It really makes governments act because they can see what is being done in neighboring countries. So when you look at these reports, I would like to highlight that the good news is that there's good news and bad news for every country. There are some areas where Zimbabwe is doing well, some areas where it's not. Kenya is doing well in some areas, but not in another. So what we really want to foster here is this cross-learning across different African countries. We are starting to have a problem with fake seed. We knew Kenya had this problem 5 years ago. They dealt with it very well. What can we learn from them? We as TASAI stand kind of in the middle. We would be more than happy to facilitate the sharing of that cross-learning of information and to work with the private sector to make sure that our recommendations are taken up by government efforts. But I think to the extent that our interests are all aligned, there's no government out there that does not want the best outcome for the smallholder farmers. It's fairly easy to convince people of our recommendations because I think the broad interests are very well aligned.
Thanks, Ed. Maybe let me take a couple because we've got maybe 5 or so questions in the chat now, and then we can go on to raised hands. First one is from Tsungai Berazuba, if I'm reading that right. What is your take on bringing in landraces farmer varieties into formal seed trade as a means of improving nutrition in seed? So farmer varieties as a means of improving nutrition in seed.
I do like that. I think we have, like Dr. Kushwa just said at the beginning, there's many neglected crops that are very important traditionally that people are just starting to recognize. But I always want to remind people that, like maize is not from Zimbabwe. It's not indigenous to Zimbabwe. Now, most of these crops are not. It's from Mexico. Potatoes are from Peru. And so sometimes we get stuck in thinking that these traditional varieties were always there and we need to preserve them there. They came in at some point and we need to integrate both indigenous knowledge, but with science. If those varieties can be improved to perform better, I think there's no scientist in the room here who would challenge that perception at all. And we should really be encouraging that, especially in the interest of crop biodiversity.
Mm. Thank you for that. Maybe I'll take one more and then we can ask Sean to bring in somebody from the through the microphone. This is Ola from Nigeria asking about some practical ways that agro input suppliers can work with producers, seed producers, to convert farmers who are used to using farm-safe seeds to use hybrid and quality OPVs. That's a challenging question. Are there some practical ways that they can do this?
Yeah, thanks, Olga from Nigeria. I know Nigeria is doing quite a lot in terms of building a rural agro dealership network that works closely with seed companies. I think it's really an incentive alignment and coordination issue here. Seed companies over a long time build relationships with agro dealers, and once they have that established, they continue to tap into that. Both parties are interested in making money. And as long as that is done in a full and transparent way, there's always the private sector as a way to get through that very effectively. You're also getting programs that are training and licensing agro dealers, to train them how to handle maize, so that maize, I keep saying maize, seed is a living organism. It needs to be held very differently from fertilizer and other things that these people might be selling. So it requires a coordination between all these parties together. And that's why in most countries, agro dealer networks work very, very closely with the seed trade associations as well. So I think it's really comes down to coordination.
Great, thank you. Sean, would you like to bring somebody in who has a raised hand with a question?
Yes, we have a couple of raised hands, but before I get to those, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A chat box as well. So I will ask you a couple of those first, Ed, if that's okay,
That's all right.
and then get to the raised hand. So the first question is from Washington Mutatu. Any study on the effect of using seed from previous crop yield? Because the cost of seed farmers are sometimes forced to use seed from previous crop, especially for crops like groundnuts.
I think it comes down to, let's assume that farmers want to make money and also to feed their family. I would say that they make that calculated decision, but for the overall, the cost of seed is a tiny part of the cost of producing a crop. When you account for farmers' labor, for crop protection chemicals, for irrigation, all these things, seed comes down to often less than 5% of the cost. So I've heard this argument a lot and people like to perpetuate it, but really relative to the cost of all other inputs, probably seed is the least cost, most bang for your money that you can get. But obviously for open pollinated crops like groundnuts, sometimes it makes sense for farmers to use their harvest from the previous season. But I leave that decision, as long as farmers are making an informed choice, we're all good.
Thank you. The next question is, thank you, Prof. Does TASAI track smallholder experience with released varieties to relate variety releases with production and productivity?
Wish we could. We can only do that at aggregate level. We know the number of varieties that are being released. We know the ones that are being commercialized. We're just starting to build the research capability to be able to link this to yield levels in a country. Unfortunately, we can't go out there and interview every smallholder farmer. So we rely very much on aggregate figures.
Thank you. So now I'm going to go ahead and take a couple of live questions. So the first question is from Garrett Shepard. So I have unmuted, and you can go ahead and ask your question directly.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Professor. My name is Garrett. I currently work for the organization called Salinta, which has started breeding hybrid true potato seed about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm now responsible for the development of that market in Africa. Further back, I go back to having managed the Panel Seed Company in Zimbabwe and the Demeter Seed Company in Malawi. Mm-hmm. And from that viewpoint, I've got some experience with selling to the smallholder farmers in those two countries. I think TASAI is a fantastic platform that you're building. It creates a lot of transparency, and it helps us private seed companies a lot in opening the borders also. But what I miss, and also in your talk, is the issue of price, mainly the price to the farmer, a fair farmer gate price, because that price support will give an incentive to the farmer of becoming more professional, right? And he'll become more critical. If I look at some of the farmers in Malawi we're selling to, that price of the commodity maize was so low that by planting maize every year, he was actually making a loss. Okay. But because they are very close to subsistence, they plant maize anyway, or they use F2. My question on the yields there, the average yield levels, you talk about just around about 2 tons per hectare. those farmers are planting hybrids that if they were able to afford the right inputs, they could get yields of up to 8 to 10 tons with those same genetics. There is no need for new hybrids. The seed that is available in those markets is fantastic. What those farmers need is true farm gate price support. The farm input support programs that are running in Zimbabwe and Malawi now sound good, but they are being abused, number one. And because of the bureaucracy involved, often the inputs arrive too late. The farmers wait till they get the input, they plant too late, they get a reduced crop. If you empower the farmers to make those decisions themselves by giving them a good price on the commodity, the rest will look after itself. And then I think whatever you said will fit in very nicely and it will develop itself and the suppliers of inputs will develop the market. But that farm gate support, price support is essential. You mentioned just now the rest of the West.
Let me, sorry if I may cut you just to allow a few other comments, but I do take your comment very well. I think you raise a lot of very, very good points there. That's why I say that it takes more than seed, first of all. You need all this enabling environment from markets to fertilizer to extension service. All these things are useful and very critical. I think we should just always say that these are not mutually exclusive solutions. You need to have all of them. Oftentimes we tempted to think it's either one or the other, but we can have good varieties, we can have good price support, we can have extension service, we can have smart subsidy programs. All these things need to be done well, and we should not fall into the fallacy of having to choose one against another. But thank you for your contribution.
Okay.
Thanks. And Sean, I think we might want to check with the program. Maybe we might want to get to one more question, then we get to closing remarks from the other panelists. I want to make sure we have enough time for them.
Yes, perfect, perfect. Okay, I will take just one more question here. This is coming from the Q&A, and it says, Prof, don't you think if we work together in plant variety protection as Africa, i.e. using the Arapo system, we will get a lot of new varieties than depending on maize alone?
I'm not quite aware of that particular program, but I think the point that I made here is still very strong. The dependency on maize is something that we need to address. In its defense, I would also say that why you see a lot of maize is that it's one of the few crops that makes money for seed companies. It's lucrative and farmers are also demanding it, so it makes sense. You want to produce a crop that farmers want to buy. But indeed, I'm quite excited that as we are opening up borders in Africa, these varieties are starting to move much more easily from one country to another. And I think collectively, we're going to see much more, a richer offering of varieties to farmers from neighboring countries and a bigger market for seed companies that are able to go out there. On that note, I'll give a shout out to Zimbabwe's premier seed company, Seedco. He is the seed company that is now a known brand all over Africa. I was working at African Development Bank, working with them in West Africa, trying to get some of those varieties. So Zimbabwe is known for its very robust and vibrant seed sector. Many countries have a lot to learn from Zimbabwe, but I think we also as Zimbabwe have a lot that we can learn from other countries, especially around emerging issues. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Obviously, we could have this discussion for another hour in and of itself. So thank you for the questions and thank you, Professor Mabaya, for your answers. Obviously, there are questions that we were not able to get to. You can definitely reach out to us directly. You can visit our website, send questions through our website. I will add that to the chat. If you still have a burning question that you would like an answer to. Now I'd like to move on to our final thoughts for today's session, since we are a little bit over time, but we did start a little bit late and just to allow for this robust discussion. So I'd like to turn it over to Professor Tangua for some final, I'm sorry, for some final comments. Thank you. So the microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Is it Sean or is it Sean who was speaking?
Yes, it's Sean.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'll just say a few words to at least just describe this session. It was a very good and very informative session. Thank you very much, Professor Mabaya, for this delivery. Professor Mabaya opened by saying that I taught him one course, and that is, he has been using that and so on, which is quite pleasing because that is what you look forward to. But I want to say that Professor Mabaya has really advanced in his own way through the agricultural economics side. I remember meeting him in Cote d'Ivoire at a meeting of Agra, and he remembered me and said something about genetics. He talked about expressivity and penetrance of genes, and I think it's good. I want to, jokes aside, I want to thank you very much for all that you have said. You have talked about a lot of things, but one thing I picked up, which is really topical in Africa and in West Africa here where I am based right now, is this electronic authentication card. I think this is something that can be picked and used across the board in terms of just making sure that seed is authentic, because we are struggling with that here in Ghana. We have got the planting for food and jobs of the government, and people dump fake seed in that program to give to farmers. And there is very little that can be done at the present state of the way we are of checking that. So this is something that I picked, which I think is very important, besides all other important things that you talked about. It was interesting to see the graphs of maize and other cereals in terms of number of varieties and the productivity and so on and so on. And those are important debates. Maybe this is where the private sector and the public sector can collaborate to make sure that you have a complete set of crops that are supplied to farmers. Is for most of the crops like sorghum, the millets, the legumes, and so on, because those are normally self-pollinating. Many companies don't make as much money as they make on maize, which can be controlled because you can control it through the hybrid and so on, you control that. So these are important things, and I think collaboration between the private sector and the public sector would really go a long way to address this. So to close, I would also like to mention the Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association. I think it's a wonderful organization. The Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association does not depend on like external funding or whatever. It's a purely Zimbabwean initiative. And I think in my experience in Africa, there are very few breeders associations that are working as well as the Zimbabwean one. And so I really give them credit for working hard and really doing a good job, which really is good for society. I really want to say that this was an informative session, and I really hope that we are going to get more of these kinds of sessions because it brought in a lot of people. I mean, on the list, I saw my former colleagues, Professor Aida Stole. I saw on the people who registered, I saw Dr. Kingston Mashingaidze. I saw other people there who I felt happy to see them on the list. And I'm quite sure that they all benefited as much as I did. So thank you, Professor Mabaya. Thank you to TASAI for the overall organization. Thank you, Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association for initiating and this whole idea and organizing it to what we experience today. So with those words, I wish to thank you very much, and I wish everybody all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those words. Now, if we could just ask Dr. Cosmos to just close us out for today, we'd be greatly appreciative, and we'd like to just thank everyone for joining us today. And hopefully in the future, we can have more robust discussions like this. Dr. Cosmos?
Thank you very much, Sean. I know we are way behind time, so I will not take a lot of time. I have posted the website for the Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association on the chat box, so you can visit us there. You can get more details about what we do. And I just want to alert you that with a few upcoming events, we are organizing the 2021 Congress together with the Tobacco Research Board. It should happen anytime soon, considering that the COVID situation is eased. We are also planning to host a dialogue with farmers to get their reflections on the output from the Pfumvudza concept, all the work that was done by government and other players in the agriculture sector to promote the cropping season. So we are going to be inviting farmers. We hear their point of view from the plant breeders' perspective to see exactly what they want. We really want to dialogue with them. So we'll be holding an event soon, something like this. You watch out, we'll send out the emails. We will also be holding field days. Now that the COVID situations seem to be over or seem to be getting better, we are planning a few field days around the country. So we will be alerting people, and we'll also be having a few training events, virtual training events such as this one, or other technical areas that are of interest to people. And with that, I don't want to take a lot of time. I just want to appreciate all the people who were organizing this event. I want to appreciate the team in the Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association group. Mrs. Nyakanda worked tirelessly to do this. We also have the VP, Dr. Zikali. We have Roger Van Rooyen from National Test, Ed Mabaya. He was a former student at CIMIT. We have Prince Matoa at Mukushi Seeds. We also have Tendai at Mukushi Seeds, Caspar at the University of Zimbabwe, and Tambudzai. This is the Zimbabwe Plant Breeders Association current team that was working tirelessly to host this event. I would like to appreciate all the efforts that were done by the University of Cornell, Sean, Christina, Professor Mabaya for making this event a success. At one time with almost 80 participants, so thank you very much. I also want to thank the Zimbabwe Seeds Association. Even though John McRobert had an emergency, he was very willing to participate in this event. He couldn't make it, but thank you very much. They contributed to that. And last but not least, thank you very much to all the participants. It was great having you. It was a great discussion, and I know that some of the questions were left hanging, particularly the GMOs, fear of the unknown, but we hope that maybe next time we will organize something along that and have an open discussion, particularly with also including the government. I know Dr. Kuchwayo is spearheading some efforts in that area. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. I would like to bring the event to a close. And this has been recorded. We'll share the recording as soon as it has been edited and everything has been done properly. And have a good morning if you're in the US. Have a good day if you are in Africa, and have a good evening if you are in Asia. Thank you very much. So this is the end of this event. Goodbye.
Thank you.